What's up, YouTube? This is Big Mike. I have a question for you guys. Who do you think between Scottie Pippen and John Havlicek was the superior player, or who would you rank higher? Of course, Scottie Pippen, all-time 50 greatest player, 6 NBA championships, considered by many to be the greatest defensive small forward of all time. And, was a shutdown artist. Many people considered him during the mid-1990s, I'd say from 92 to about 96, while he never won an MVP award. Many people consider him the best all-around player in the NBA. And that would include Michael Jordan, in particular in his comeback years. So you have Scottie Pippen there, and then you have John Havlicek, who some people feel is the best defensive small forward of all time, if not the best defensive, the second best defensive small forward, behind only Scottie Pippen. Of course, John Havlicek, he wasn't the original sixth man. He wasn't the original one. The late, recently departed Frank Ramsey was the one who really originated that role, but John Havlicek took it from Frank Ramsey and brought it to a whole nother level. And when John Havlicek became a starter, he was one of the great players in the history of the NBA, 8 NBA championships, and just was an all-around great player for the Celtics for many, many years. When you compare the two, man, me personally, I put Havlicek ahead of Scottie Pippen. And I can understand the argument either way, but to me, this is how I feel, okay? I think Scottie was, of course, obviously athletically superior to John Havlicek. All right. Longer, leaner. Although I believe Havlicek was a little bit taller. But, Scottie had these unusual proportions that made him just a nightmare defensively for various players. Nobody calls Magic Johnson our problems in the 1991 NBA Finals. But look at the way Scottie Pippen came into the NBA. And, but before I go there, we can't slouch on Havlicek either, because Havlicek was a guy who was heavily touted by the NFL. I believe it was the Cleveland Browns before he decided to play basketball. So Havlicek was no slouch athletically either. Of course, Havlicek was noted for his endurance. If I'm not mistaken, I believe Havlicek had an abnormality with his anatomy where his lungs were bigger than normal. And because of his lungs being bigger than normal, he was able to oxygenate faster and more rapidly than most people. And that's why he was able to have such incredible stamina. But I'll give the athletic edge to Scottie Pippen in this situation. But Scottie didn't come into the NBA as Scottie Pippen. He was developed. Okay, he struggled. I think John Havlicek, while he didn't come into the NBA gangbusters, he was a little bit more NBA ready than Scottie Pippen was. I think Havlicek, despite the relatively low field goal percentage, I thought that he was a better scorer, a more willing scorer than Scottie Pippen. I think he was far more clutch as a player. One of the great clutch players of all time, John Havlicek. Scottie Pippen was never known for being a clutch basketball player, at least not on the offensive end. And leadership. leadership qualities is not something that you can teach. It's something that you either are born with or you can develop. And there are many instances where Scottie Pippen did not show leadership. That was pretty much Michael Jordan's team. When Jordan left, Scottie Pippen was the de facto leader of that team. Yet there are many times, one instance come to mind is Game 3 of the 1994 Eastern Conference semifinal between the Bulls and the Knicks, when Scottie Pippen refused to come out on the court because that shot, the last second shot, was not designed for him, but Tony Kukoc. He famously sat on the bench, and interestingly, it appeared that was the correct call by Phil Jackson because Tony Kukoc did actually make that shot. It was a very important shot because I believe the game was tied. I might be wrong about that, but I thought the game was tied. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but had the game gone to overtime and the Bulls had lost that game, they would have been down 3-0. So them winning that game was very important, although ultimately they lost in 7. But leadership quality-wise, I have to go with John Havlicek. Now, one thing that I'll go with Scottie Pippen is some people will say, well, John Havlicek played in the era where, there was only 8 teams, in the league. And, that's kind of facetious because, okay, maybe in the early part of Havlicek's career, there were only 8 teams. But by the time Bill Russell retired, there were 14 NBA teams. And by the time John Havlicek won his last few championships, and by the time he retired, there were well over 20 teams in the league. So you can't just sit there and make these blanket arguments without being a little bit more accurate and factual. So Scottie Pippen probably had a little bit more competition as far as teams is concerned. But you could also make the argument that because there were fewer teams when John Havlicek played, the level of talent that he played against was superior because by there being fewer roster spots, the better talent was being displayed. You know what I'm saying? So there's that argument. But anyway, I think Pippen was the better defender of the two marginally, because Havlicek was a beast defensively as well. I think Havlicek was the better scorer. Neither was a great shooter per se. If I had to, it's interesting. Havlicek was the better shooter in most ways. From 22 feet on in, I would give it to Havlicek. Havlicek was a better free throw shooter, for whatever that's worth. But Pippen was probably actually the better three-point shooter, or at least set shooter. So that's kind of I guess it's kind of a wash with that one. But I think Havlicek was the more willing scorer and the better scorer. Havlicek was probably the better rebounder. Passing, I guess I go with Pippen. So it's close. But tell me what you guys think, man. Me historically, I have Scottie, I think, like in my top 35. And I think I have Havlicek like in my top 20, if I'm not mistaken. Or if not in my top 20, he's like in my top 25 or somewhere in that range. So I do think that Havlicek was slightly superior. I think he was slightly superior player. I thought he ended his career as a more dominant player than Scottie. Statistically, in a lot of ways, to be honest with you, he blows Scottie out the water, especially when it comes to scoring. I believe Scottie scored something like, ooh, what was it? What was his final numbers? I'm trying to think of Scottie's final career scoring numbers. 17,000 points, I think. Well, Havlicek had 26,395. So, but anyway, tell me what you guys think, man. Who was the better player in your eyes, Scottie Pippen or John Havlicek?